Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. And I have a new announcement. There's now a YouTube channel with the same name, Daily Readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. And if you go there, you'll find they're all there. All the Bhagavatam and the whole Gita. But they're organized in such a way that you can see them all. So you can see which one you want to listen to, and it's quite an accomplishment. So we should all give our proper respects and blessings and appreciation to Mayapur Shashi Prabhu. Haribol. Definitely an increase of the exposure of Srila Prabhupada's books. And now there's two places that you can hear Srila Prabhupada's books read straight through every day. It's good, huh? It's too good. All right. So, Srimad-Bhagavatam Mahima Stotram, the glories of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, compiled by Srila Sanatana Goswami, one of our senior previous acharyas, who Lord Chaitanya glorified as if he had 10 mouths. He thought so highly of him. Very, very qualified person before he joined Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. And it goes like this. Sarva Shastabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich wine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidvandoditaditya Shri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Shri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namastume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Shri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Man Mahadana Man Nistadaka Madbhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, Savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadhu tadayin atini shochatakada hanamun chakadachin mam premnarit kantayos. O bestow saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we're going deeper into the Uddhava Gita. Krishna is now explaining to Uddhava the nature of fruitive activity. And we're beginning in chapter 10, beginning with text number 20. Death is not at all pleasing. Shall I repeat that? Death is not at all pleasing. And since everyone is exactly like a condemned man being led to the place of execution, What possible happiness can people derive from material objects or the gratification they provide? A little tough love here. Purport by Krishna himself. It is customary throughout the world that a condemned man is offered a sumptuous last meal. For the condemned man, however, such a feast is a chilling reminder of his imminent death, and therefore he cannot enjoy it. Similarly, no sane human being can be satisfied in material life, because death is standing near and may strike at any moment. If one is sitting in one's living room with a deadly snake at one's side, knowing that at any moment the poisonous fangs might pierce the flesh, how can one sit peacefully and watch television or read a book? Similarly, unless one is more or less crazy, one cannot be enthusiastic or even peaceful in material life. Knowledge of the inevitability of death should encourage one to become determined in spiritual life. Oh, you guys are just fatalists. All you think about is death. What a drag. Text 21. That material happiness of which we hear, such as promotion to heavenly planets for celestial enjoyment, is just like that material happiness we have already experienced. Both are polluted by jealousy, envy, decay, and death. Therefore, just as an attempt to raise crops becomes fruitless if there are many problems like crop disease, insect plague, or drought, similarly, the attempt to attain material happiness either on earth or on the heavenly planets is always fruitless because of innumerable obstacles. Purport. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments as follows on this verse. Ordinarily, if there is no specific impediment, agricultural endeavors will yield their fruits. If, however, there is a defect in the seed, or if the soil is too salty or barren, or if there is drought, plague, excessive rain or heat out of season, or if there are disturbances caused by animals, birds, or insects, then agricultural activities will not yield the desired harvest. Similarly, those who are expert in analyzing the material world see that the heavenly situations offered in the Vedas are not basically different from life on the earth. By the interaction of conditioned souls, there will inevitably be jealousy as one becomes disgusted as superior and another, By the interaction of conditioned souls, there will inevitably be jealousy as one becomes distinguished as superior and another as inferior. By the power of time, these positions are reversed, and therefore violence and intrigue disturb life even on the heavenly planets. In fact, the attempt to promote oneself to the heavenly planets is itself full of problems and disturbances. One should therefore understand that the kingdom of God, Vaikuntha, is transcendental to the limitations and disturbances imposed by the laws of material nature in this world. If one wrongly concludes that such imperfections are also present in the kingdom of God, then one will be polluted by material contamination. Text 3. If one performs Vedic sacrifices and fruitive rituals without any mistake or contamination, one will achieve a heavenly situation in the next life. But even this result, which is only achieved by perfect performance of fruitive rituals, will be vanquished by time. Now hear of this. Purport. The word gacchati means going. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Agama payino nitya. All material experiences, good or bad, come and go. Therefore, the word gacchati refers to the disappearance of the results of even the most meticulously performed fruitive sacrifices. Any material situation, from the worst to the best, is imperfect. Thus one should strive only for pure Krishna consciousness. Text 23. If on earth one performs sacrifices for the satisfaction of the demigods, he goes to the heavenly planets, where, just like a demigod, he enjoys all of the heavenly pleasures he has earned by his performances. Text 24. Having achieved the heavenly planets, the performer of ritualistic sacrifices travels in a glowing airplane, which he obtains as a result of his piety on earth. Being glorified by songs sung by the Gandharvas and dressed in wonderfully charming clothes, he enjoys life surrounded by heavenly goddesses. 25. Accompanied by heavenly women, the enjoyer of the fruits of sacrifice goes on pleasure rides in a wonderful airplane, which is decorated with circles of tinkling bells and which flies wherever he desires, being relaxed, comfortable, and happy in the heavenly pleasure gardens. He does not consider that he is exhausting the fruits of his piety and will soon fall down to the mortal world. 26. Until his pious results are used up, the performer of sacrifice enjoys life in the heavenly planets. When the pious results are exhausted, however, he falls down from the pleasure gardens of heaven, being moved against his desire by the force of eternal time. If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy, and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest modes of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future unhappiness. And therefore, he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activity inevitably terminating in death? Purport. In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes to the path of Nivritti Marg immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies his existence by performance of austerity and devotional activities. On the path of Pravritti Marg, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such sense objects under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material senses. Unfortunately, as explained in these verses and the previous verse, the path of Pravritti Marg is extremely volatile, because rather than becoming detached, the living entity often becomes uncontrolled and fully addicted to further sense gratification. In the previous verse, the path of regulated, authorized sense gratification was described, and in these verses, the path of unauthorized, demoniac sense gratification is described. In verse 27, the words sangad, asatam, vajitendriya are very significant. One may fall down into sinful life by bad association or even in good association, one may fail to control his senses. Ultimately, each living entity is responsible for his existential situation. The word adharma rata in the same verse indicates those engaged in excessive sex life, meat eating, drinking, and other inauspicious activities that transgress the codes of civilized human life. Being in the mode of ignorance, these persons developed such a cruel mentality that they do not consider any festive occasion complete without the consumption of large quantities of meat obtained by slaughtering helpless animals. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Sometimes these lusty, intoxicated carnivores, considering themselves pious, pray to God in a useless way. Afflicted by innumerable material desires, they rotate from one material body to another without experiencing true happiness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has noted that material life is so disturbing that even if one is allowed to live for an entire day of Brahma, approximately 8,640,000,000 years, one will eventually be afflicted by the fear of death. In fact, Brahma himself is disturbed by fear of death. What to speak of tiny human beings who live a paltry 70 or 80 years at the most. Thus, as stated here, Kim Sukham Martyadharminaha, what possible happiness can one find within the painful grip of material illusion? Text 30. In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly to the hellish, and for all of the great demigods who live for 1,000 yuga cycles, there is fear of me in my form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan of 311 trillion, 40 billion years, is also afraid of me. Purport: there are many statements throughout Vedic literature proving that even the great demigods fear the time potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even in the heavenly planets, there is no relief from the miseries of material life. No conditioned soul can live eternally, as clearly demonstrated by the deaths of Hiranyakashipu and other demons. Since the demigods fear the time potency of the Personality of Godhead, one may easily conclude that Krishna is the absolute truth, and that he is eternally the supreme controller of everything and everyone. Lord Krishna is the only real shelter. Text 31. The material senses create material activities, either pious or sinful, and the modes of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results of fruitive work. Purport: it has been explained in the previous verses that the living entity, under the control of fruitive activities, is pushed down into a hellish condition of life. In this verse, the exact nature of the living entity's dependence on fruitive activities is described. One can observe that one's activities are performed by the material senses, and that the living entity himself is merely conscious of such activities. One may be worshipping the demigods, enjoying sex, or performing agricultural or intellectual activities. But in all cases, the material senses are performing the work. One may argue that the spirit soul initiates the activities of the senses, and thus is the ultimate doer. But such false egotism is negated in this verse by the statement, Guna srijanti karmani guno nusrijate gunan. The three modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, stimulate the functions of the material senses, and the living entity coming under the control of a particular mode of nature merely experiences the good and bad results of his work. This does not negate the concept of free will, since the living entity chooses to associate with different modes of nature. By one's eating, speaking, sexual activities, occupation, etc., one associates with various modes of nature and acquires a particular mentality. But in all cases, the modes of nature themselves are acting, not the living entity. The word asau in this verse indicates that the living entity falsely considers himself to be the performer of work carried out by nature. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 3:27, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. The conditioned soul can be liberated simply by giving up this false egoistic conception of life and taking to the devotional service of the Lord, by which the living entity, or marginal potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, escapes the disturbing influence of the external potency called Maya. In the devotional service of the Lord, the liberated entity realizes his actual form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. It is natural to perform activities with the desire to achieve a good result. The best results, however, can be attained by one who engages in the devotional service of the Lord with the desire to be reinstated in his constitutional position as the Lord's loving servant. In this way, the tendency to exploit one's own activities for a particular result can be purified. Then the modes of nature and the material senses will no longer engage the living entity in illusion. The living entity is by nature blissful, and when his illusion ceases, all suffering comes to an end. The liberated soul is then fit to reside in Vaikuntha Loka, or Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God. Text 32. As long as the living entity thinks that the modes of material nature have separate existences, he will be obliged to take birth in many different forms and will experience varieties of material existence. Therefore, the living entity remains completely dependent on fruitive activities under the modes of nature. Purport. The word guna vaishamyam indicates forgetfulness of Lord Krishna, which causes one to see material varieties as separate states of existence. The living entity, being attracted to material varieties and having faith in them, is forced to experience these varieties in different material bodies, such as those of demigods, pigs, businessmen, insects, and so on. You know, every morning over at Gora's, there's a beautiful cardinal bird. Beautiful. And every morning, and this has been going on for months, every morning there's a big window, and it's surrounded by foliage, plants and stuff. And he comes every morning, and he goes clunk, and he hits the thing, and then he flies to the other, and then he comes back, and he clunk again. He does this again and again and again every morning for months. What?
He does it even to our windows.
Oh, he does it. Same one?
Same one.
That's been going on for years over there.
Yeah. So this is what it's talking about here. You get a nice, really beautiful, I mean, this bird, beautiful red and black and, like they name a baseball team after it, That's all the sports teams. They name their mascots are all some kinds of animals, or birds. Oh, Krishna. The living entity being attracted to material variety, this is where the term bird brain came from, Because he's thinking he's attacking some other bird's attacking him. So he's got this thing, I'm going to get that guy, tomorrow morning I'm going to get him, And we're laughing, and we laugh at ourselves, because every morning we get up and do all these different things to try to... The living entity, being attracted to material varieties and having faith in them, is forced to experience these varieties in different material bodies, such as those of demigods, pigs, cardinals, businessmen, insects, and so on. According to the Karma Mimamsa philosophers, there is no transcendental living entity who is the background of all existence. They accept material variety as the final reality. However, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is the actual basis of everything. Everything is within him, and he is within everything. A pure devotee of the Lord sees Krishna everywhere and sees all of the variegated modes of nature as the potency of Lord Krishna. One who does not see Lord Krishna will certainly see material variegatedness as the supreme reality. Such vision is called Maya, or gross illusion, and similar to the vision of an animal. Paratantyam means one will remain caught in the web of fruitive activities unless one gives up this superficial separatist vision. Text 33. The conditioned soul who remains dependent on fruitive activities under the material modes of nature will continue to fear me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And since I impose the results of one's fruitive activities, those who accept the material concept of life, taking the variegatedness of the modes of nature to be factual, devote themselves to material enjoyment and are therefore always absorbed in lamentation and grief. Purport. The living entity is bound in the network of illusion, but although he can understand that he is dependent upon superior powers, he does not want to serve the Supreme Lord. I'll repeat that. This is a very important sentence. The living entity is bound in the network of illusion, but although he can understand that he is dependent upon superior powers, he does not want to serve the Supreme Lord. He thus becomes filled with fear of life itself. Desiring material sense gratification, the living entity, like the demon Kamsa, always fears destruction of his material arrangement. Remaining addicted to the flavors of material nature, one gradually sinks down into the irrational form of life. Maya has two potencies. The first covers the living entity, and the second throws him down into hellish condition of life. When one is covered by Maya, one loses all power of discrimination, and Maya then throws such a fool into the darkness of ignorance. When one wrongly considers oneself to be independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, one becomes a worshipper of temporary material objects, hoping to enjoy material sense gratification. And as one grows older, one's life becomes filled with fear and anxiety. A conditioned soul considers himself in control of his life, but since he does not have any actual controlling potency, his situation is contradictory and not at all pleasing. As all of one's material possessions are taken away by time, one becomes filled with lamentation. All in all, material life is truly abominable, and it is only because of dense illusion that we accept it as satisfactory. Text 34. When there is agitation and interaction of the material modes of nature, the living entities then describe me in various ways, such as all-powerful time, the self, Vedic knowledge, the universe, one's own nature, religious ceremonies, and so on. Purport. One can experience the potency of the personality of Godhead by observing how different species of life, demigods, human beings, animals, fish, birds, insects, trains, plants, the horn blower. They must have a guy there just stationed, just lean on that horn. Anyway.
They trained him well.
What?
They trained him well.
Yeah.
Here it comes, I see the temple.
Okay. Each species of life executes a particular process of sense gratification, and this function is called the dharma of the species. Lacking knowledge of the personality of Godhead, ordinary persons catch a glimpse of the Lord's potencies in the above-mentioned manifestations. Srila Madhvacharya has cited the following information from the Tantra Bhagavatam. The Lord is called Kala, or time, because he is the mover and controller of all material qualities. Because he is complete and perfect, he is called Atma, or the Self, and he is the personification of all knowledge. The word Swabhava indicates that the Lord fully controls his own destiny, and as the maintainer of everyone, he is called Dharma. On the liberated platform, one on the liberated platform can achieve unlimited bliss by worshiping the personality of Godhead, whereas those who are ignorant of the Lord try to find happiness by concocting other objects of worship. If one stubbornly imagines that anything is independent of the Lord, one will remain in the grip of the illusory network of the Lord's potency. I will repeat that. This is very important. If one stubbornly imagines that anything is independent of the Lord, one will remain in the grip of the illusory network of the Lord's potency. This is the purpose of philosophy, the purpose of knowledge. Seeing the inevitability of the destruction of material things, one is constantly fearful and perpetually laments in the darkness of ignorance. In such darkness there is no question of happiness. Therefore, one should never think that anything is independent of the personality of Godhead. As soon as one considers anything to be independent of the Lord, one is immediately gripped by the Lord's illusory network, called Maya. One should always remain humble and obedient to the personality of Godhead, even when one is liberated, and thus one will achieve the supreme spiritual happiness. Text 35. Sri Uddhava said, O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how is he ever bound by material nature? Just in case you can't figure out the questions to ask, here it is. Purport. Due to the influence of the modes of nature, the material body generates fruitive activities, which in turn generate material happiness and distress. This material chain reaction is indicated by the word Deha Jeshu. The personality of Godhead has shown Uddhava that the actual goal of life is liberation, not sense gratification. Although the Lord has indicated that the living entity is liberated by devotional service performed with knowledge and renunciation, Uddhava apparently does not understand the specific means of perfection. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, Uddhava's question implies that we observe even in the activities of liberated souls such external activities as eating, sleeping, walking, hearing, speaking, etc., which are functions of the gross and subtle bodies. Thus, if even liberated souls are situated within the gross and subtle material bodies, then how are they not bound by the material modes of nature? If it is argued that the living entity is like the sky, which never mixes with any other object, and therefore is not bound, then one may ask how such a transcendental living entity can ever be bound by material nature. In other words, how would material existence be possible? In order to completely clarify the path of Krishna consciousness, Uddhava presents this question to the Supreme Spiritual Authority, Lord Krishna. In the kingdom of Maya, there are innumerable speculations about the Supreme Lord, who is variously described as non-existent, or as possessing material qualities, or as being devoid of all qualities, or as being a neuter object like a eunuch. But through mundane speculation, it is not possible to understand the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, Uddhava wants to clear the path of spiritual liberation so that people can actually understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As long as one is affected by the modes of nature, perfect understanding is not possible. Lord Krishna will now describe to Uddhava further details of spiritual emancipation on the road back home, back to Krishna. Text 36 and 37. O my Lord, Achyuta, the same living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and at other times as eternally liberated. I am not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would they remain situated? Enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about. Purport. In previous verses, Lord Krishna has explained to Uddhava that an eternally liberated soul is beyond the three modes of material nature. Since a liberated soul is considered to be beyond even the superior mode of goodness, how can he be recognized? By false identification with the modes of nature, which produce one's own material body, one is bound by illusion. On the other hand, by transcending the modes of nature, one is liberated. However, in ordinary activities, such as eating, evacuating, relaxing, sitting and sleeping, a liberated soul and a conditioned soul appear to be the same. Therefore, Uddhava is inquiring, by what symptoms can I recognize that one living entity is performing such external activities without false ego? And by what symptoms can I recognize one who is working under the illusory bondage of material identification? This is difficult because the ordinary bodily functions of living conditioned personalities appear similar. Uddhava has approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead, taking him as his personal spiritual master, and wants to be enlightened about how to understand the differences between material and spiritual life. Since the living entity is sometimes called eternally conditioned, how could he ever be considered eternally liberated, or vice versa? This is an apparent contradiction, which will be cleared up by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whoa, the end of this chapter. Thus end the purports of the humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 11th canto, 10th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, entitled The Nature of Fruitive Activity. Jai Shri Krishna Ki Jai. Okay. Before we go to the next chapter, I want to just read this last paragraph. Since the living entity is sometimes called eternally conditioned, how can he ever be considered eternally liberated, or vice versa? This is an apparent contradiction, which will be cleared up by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So listen up, kids, because now we're going to get the answer. Chapter 11. The symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. In this chapter, Lord Sri Krishna describes to Uddhava the difference between conditioned and liberated living entities, the characteristics of a saintly person, and the different aspects of the practice of devotional service. In the previous chapter, Uddhava had presented questions regarding conditioned and liberated souls. In his replies, the Almighty Lord Sri Krishna states that although the spirit soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, on account of his infinitesimal nature, he falls into contact with the material energy, which causes him to accept the covering designations of the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Thus the soul has been bound up since time immemorial, but when he achieves the shelter of pure devotional service, he becomes designated as eternally liberated. Transcendental knowledge is therefore the cause of the living entity's liberation, and ignorance is the cause of his bondage. Both knowledge and ignorance are produced by the Maya energy of Lord Sri Krishna and are his eternal potencies. The living entities who become attracted to the modes of nature are bewildered by false ego, which causes them to see themselves as the enjoyers of misery, confusion, happiness, distress, danger, and so on. In this way they meditate upon such states of being, although in the real or spiritual world these things do not exist. Both the jiva, individual soul, and the supersoul reside within the same body. The difference between them is that the almighty supersoul, being fully cognizant, does not indulge in enjoying the fruits of material work, but remains simply as a witness, whereas the infinitesimal conditioned jiva, being ignorant, suffers the consequences of his own work. The liberated jiva, in spite of being within a material body, because of the remaining reactions of his past activities, does not become disturbed by the happiness and suffering of the body. He sees such bodily experiences in the same way that a person who has just awakened from a dream sees his dream experiences. On the other hand, although the conditioned living entity is by nature not the enjoyer of the happiness and misery of the body, he imagines himself to be the enjoyer of his bodily experiences, just as a person in a dream imagines his dream experiences to be real. Just as the sun reflected upon water is not actually bound up by in the water, and just as the air is not confined to some particular segment of the sky, similarly, a detached person takes advantage of his broad outlook on the world to cut off all his doubts with the sword of appropriate renunciation, yukta, vairagya. Since his life force, senses, mind, and intelligence have no tendency to fix themselves on sense objects, he remains liberated even while situated within the material. This is really heavy. Listen to this. Just as the sun reflected upon water is not actually bound up in the water, and just as the air is not confined to some particular segment of the sky, similarly, a detached person takes advantage of his broad outlook on the world to cut off all his doubts with the sword of appropriate renunciation, yukta vairagya. Since his life force, senses, mind, and intelligence have no tendency to fix themselves on sense objects, he remains liberated, even while situated within the material body. Regardless of whether he is harassed or worshipped, he remains equipoised. Regardless of whether he is harassed or worshipped, he remains equipoised. He is therefore considered liberated even in this life. A liberated person has nothing to do with the piety and sin of this world, but rather sees everything equally. A self-satisfied sage does not praise or condemn anyone. He does not speak uselessly to anyone and does not fix his mind on material things. Rather, he is always merged in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so in the eyes of fools, he seems to be a speechless, crazy person. Even if someone has studied or even taught all the different Vedic literatures, if he has not developed pure attraction to the service of the Personality of Godhead, he has accomplished nothing beyond his own labor. One should study only those scriptures in which the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his enchanting pastimes, and the nectarian topics of his various incarnations are scientifically discussed. Thus one gains the highest good fortune. However, by studying scriptures other than these, one simply acquires misfortune. With full determination, one should properly understand the identity of the soul and give up false identification with this material body. He may then offer his heart at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, the reservoir of all love, and attain real peace. When the mind is carried away by the three modes of nature, it can no longer meditate properly on the transcendental supreme truth. After many lifetimes, faithful persons who have performed Vedic sacrifices for acquiring religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification, finally engage in hearing, chanting, and constantly thinking of the Supreme Lord's all-auspicious pastimes, which purify the entire universe. Such persons then achieve the association of a bona fide spiritual master and the saintly devotees. After that, by the mercy of the spiritual master, they begin to follow the paths set out by the standard authorities of spiritual life, the Mahajans, Prabhupada way. Did you get the message from Manasi? I won. Well, almost. I insisted on way, but I wanted to have Gauranga way. But even better, Prabhupada way is even better. Prabhupada way. Follow the paths, the way of the standard authorities of spiritual life, the Mahajans, and become actually perfect in realization of their own true identity. Having heard these instructions from Lord Krishna, Uddhava further desired to understand the characteristics of a factually saintly person and the different aspects of devotional practice. Lord Krishna replied that a real sadhu or Vaishnava is qualified with the following characteristics. He is merciful, non-envious, always truthful, self-controlled, faultless, magnanimous, gentle, clean, non-possessive, helpful to all, peaceful, dependent on Krishna alone, free from lust, devoid of material endeavor, steady, in control of the 6 enemies of the mind, moderate in eating, never bewildered, always respectful to others, never desirous of respect for himself, sober, compassionate, friendly, poetic, expert, and silent. The principal characteristic of a sadhu is that he takes shelter of Krishna alone. One who engages exclusively in Krishna's service and understands him as the limitless, indwelling Lord who comprises eternity, knowledge, and bliss is the topmost devotee. The practice of devotional service includes 64 kinds of activities. Among these are 1 through 6, seeing, touching, worshipping, serving, glorifying, and offering obeisances to the deity of the Lord and his pure devotees. 7, developing attachment for hearing the chanting of the Lord's qualities, pastimes, and so on. 8, remaining always in meditation upon the Lord. 9, offering everything one acquires to the Lord. 10, accepting oneself to be the Lord's servant. 11, offering the Lord one's heart and soul. 12, engaging in glorification of the Lord's birth and activities. 13, observing holidays related to the Lord. 14, performing festivals in the Lord's temple and in the company of other devotees, and with music, singing, and dancing. 15, celebrating all varieties of yearly functions. 16, offering food. 17, taking initiation according to the Vedas and Tantras. 18, taking vows related to the Lord. 19, being eager to establish deities of the Lord. 20, endeavoring, either alone or in the association with of others, in constructing for the service of the Lord vegetable and flower gardens. Gotcha. Temples, cities, and so on. 21, humbly cleansing the temple of the Lord. And 22, rendering service to the Lord's house by painting it, washing it with water, and decorating it with auspicious signs. After this, the process of worshipping the deity of the Supreme Lord is described in brief. That's the summary of the chapter. My gosh. I think we'll stop here. and get into the details tomorrow. Hare Krishna, devotional service ki jai. Jai Shri Krishna ki jai. Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo. Okay. Time for our open mic. I'll start our reflection. It's pretty clear how you have to actually reject ignorance to go to knowledge. Rishabdev's going to start us off.
Hare Krishna, Gurudev. I really thought it was nice how Prabhupada, Krishna was giving these questions at the end of the last chapter, and then Prabhupada kind of unpacked it. Like it was really unpacked and kind of a lot more detail to it. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, that was the summary of the chapter. Summary of the next chapter. Okay, nice. Yes, Kalpataru, it's about time. Finally, we get some sanity.
Hare Krishna. Well, you said, I was also wondering when we were reading that it says that both knowledge and ignorance come from Maya. What
Yes,
does that?
yes. It means that the material energy that covers this soul has the beginning of the potency to take us toward Krishna. The material energy doesn't have the potency to take us to Krishna, but it has a tendency to take us toward Krishna. That's the mode of goodness. If you read carefully the Bhagavad Gita, it will tell you that if you live in the mode of goodness constantly, then you get a glimpse that you get taken in the direction of Krishna, and you get a glimpse. So when you see Krishna, when you hear about Krishna, you like it. You may not have love for Krishna, you may not even be able to engage in devotional service, but the cultivation of knowledge, if you, let me see, 12th chapter, 12th chapter, verses 8 to 12, describes how the goal is to fix the mind on Krishna and nothing else, without moving it to anything else, right? And if you can't do that, then take up the regulated principles of Bhakti Yoga. And if you can't do that, work for Krishna. I mean work for Krishna, not just work, do any work, but work for Krishna. And if you can't do that, yes, become independent, honest, work honestly, give the fruit. Give the fruit to good causes, national service, hospital work. This gives you a tendency to get the taste for what it means to give up the fruit. And if you can't do that, cultivate knowledge. That's the mode of goodness. That's in the modes of nature. Cultivate knowledge. Better than knowledge is?
Meditation.
Contemplation of the knowledge. Understanding, proper understanding of the knowledge. And better than that?
Renunciation of fruits of action.
Detachment of the fruits of action. Why? Because you get a peaceful mind. So the purpose of the mode of goodness is to give you a peaceful mind so that your mind can think about Krishna. So in this way, the modes of nature can take you toward Krishna. But only unless you come in contact with pure devotional service through the devotees who are practicing devotional service and through Krishna and the spiritual master, can you go to the regulated principles of devotional service and then full meditation on Krishna. Is that okay?
I was thinking more like knowledge, it comes from Krishna, but I guess Maya is also.
Both comes.
Krishna.
That's therefore it says, Krishna is. Everything is in Krishna, and Krishna is in everything. We got one in line. Okay.
Oh, it was just
It was the same question.
yeah.
Who? Read it out. Don't just ignore people.
Carlos Lopez says,
Carlos Lopez.
but if Maya is illusion,
Is this the fighter, Carlos, or no? Somebody else. Who is this?
That's Jose Seca, that's how I knew it was.
Oh, that's Jose. But this is Carlos. But Carlos comes sometimes to read.
I don't think the same.
You don't know if it's. I don't know if it's the same one either. Anyway, Carlos, read the question.
but if Maya is illusion, how is Maya knowledge?
Okay, I think I just answered that.
Yeah.
So if you didn't get it from the answer I just gave, Carlos, if you're still out there, you can answer another question.
He asked one more. He says, can the illusion of Maya cloud our knowledge?
Yes. The illusion of knowledge can cloud our knowledge of ourselves and of Krishna. But it can also bring us. Is that? She's getting herself wound up to leave. I can tell that. She's getting it right in the right place. Oh, you have to turn the button, and then she goes out, and then she's still got it. Okay, I got it. There's a difference between the knowledge that brings us out of ignorance and toward the devotional service and the actual knowledge of pure devotional service. There's a difference. But there is vidya and avidya within the material nature. There's vidya and avidya in the material nature. And that vidya takes us toward Krishna. And avidya takes us away from Krishna. That's the difference. Yes. Jair,
Hare Krishna.
keep us going. Let's go.
What I'm getting from it is that in Maya, there can be material knowledge, and at the same time ignorance, consumerism, like mass consumerism, and the knowledge, even though it is applicable, if you rely on that knowledge, you ultimately fall into ignorance, because that's material knowledge, and that knowledge isn't going. It only answers so many questions. It doesn't ultimately answer everything. And that's a form of knowledge. And that's how I kind of understood it, that at the same time, even though
it takes you in the direction of
direction.
understanding that there's a difference between matter and spirit. But just the difference between matter and spirit does not give you liberation and does not give you, not what to speak of devotional service. So the knowledge that when you meditate on this knowledge and you think, oh yes, I'm dreaming, like we've heard, I'm dreaming and I'm feeling things and I'm having experiences, and then it's over, and then I come to this platform and I'm thinking things and feeling things just like I was in the dream, but I'm in both places. So which am I? That's knowledge. That's vidya. That's within the modes of nature. That takes us to the position of inquiring about the supreme truth. Yes. And when we're in the spiritual world, then as we talked about yesterday, when fire is burning, when fire comes out of an object, and the fire burns, and the object becomes finished. Fire is finished, object is finished. So when that part of knowledge is extinguished by devotional service, then one realizes who he is, and one can live in devotional service, in devotional life. And then the question was, what? But that person may still eat and sleep and evacuate and do the things that a materially conditioned person. So what's the difference? Difference is that he's not going to come back into another material body.
So outwardly, we may not be able to even tell the difference between the. Outwardly, it said outwardly, we may not be able to distinguish between.
Oh no, it says outwardly. That's why there's a list of things that was just given that you can perceive.
Oh.
But in ignorance, if a person's in ignorance, then he will only be able to see, oh, this person's eating, this person's sleeping, this person's... So what's the difference? So therefore this chapter, this next chapter, is going to explain what the difference is.
Just
Yes, Prana.
another reason that Krishna is going to tell Uddhava in the next few verses is, he says, like, since one is never bound, the soul is always aloof. What is that? Asanko yayam purusha, the Vedic aphorism, that the soul is always aloof, actually. It's never bound. Therefore, the soul, in one sense, is the term liberated is also an illusory term because the soul was never bound. You can only be liberated if you were bound by something. So in that perspective, Krishna is saying that this, the liberation and the bondage are both illusory.
That's a fine line. That's a fine line, because then there won't be any difference between a liberated soul and a conditioned soul. But there is a difference. The soul isn't ultimately affected, but that doesn't mean that the effect isn't there. Therefore, leaving the body is not easy for anyone. The actual process of leaving the body. The soul may be, Prabhupada's soul was liberated and more than liberated, but I was there in the room. It was not easy to leave the body for anyone. But he was completely aloof. I witnessed it myself. He would be kind of like, it looked like he was gone, but then all of a sudden he would make a statement, like, and he understood all the things that were going on in the room. So if you were not in knowledge and you saw that, you would think that he was just like an ordinary conditioned soul. But then they would put the microphone here, and he would come out with these unbelievable purports. And then one time he was laying on his side, and we were sitting kind of like in the corner room, a few of us, and he smiled, and he said, "Don't think this isn't going to happen to you." And it went, whoa, kind of indelibly there still. So even though it's a fact that the soul is not actually affected, he thinks he is. And therefore the effect of it is that he is. Because if you don't make that distinction, then the difference melts away, and it doesn't make any difference what you do. That's Mayavad.
I guess my understanding of, we haven't read the verse, but I read ahead and I've read this a few times, but my understanding of it was like if in the example given when someone says that they walk into the bank and renounce all the money in the bank, it's like the sense of proprietorship was illusory, and the sense of renunciation of it was also illusory because
it didn't belong to him in the first place.
It didn't belong to him in the first place. So, I think in that sense, I mean, it's a very contextual statement because your point is very well put and taken because, anyways, I guess we'll talk about it and read about it tomorrow. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
As we will. As Krishna explains it in detail, point by point by point. But it's a fact that we have to, it's up to us. We may hear, but it's up to us to make the effort to understand it and to inquire about it until we do understand it. I like that. I think it was Vasika he read something. Maybe he was reading the Bhagavad Gita in the class. Somebody remember?
Oh, today?
No, last. Yeah. Did he read? He was reading from chapter 4 today or last one? Today. Yeah, and this one part that he read, I'd like to read it again because. Yeah, 434. One must be able to pass the test of the spiritual master. Oh yeah. When one sees, and when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, he automatically blesses the disciple with genuine spiritual understanding. In this verse, both blind following, that means you may hear it, but you don't follow blindly, you have to understand. And this is very important. Both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. If you ask a question that's just way, way beyond your level, to show off, basically, then you're not going to get the knowledge. And then, he says, not only should one hear submissively from the spiritual master, but also one must get a clear understanding from him in submission and service and inquiries. It means if you don't understand, then you inquire. And if you still don't understand, you inquire. And if you still don't understand, you inquire until you understand. Don't let anything go by. I watched Gopi Pranadana in action. And of course he was way, way beyond this beginning stage. But he wouldn't translate something unless he understood it. And usually did. But sometimes he would run up against a phrase or a paragraph or thought that he couldn't understand it from Sanskrit. It's not easy. And so he would just wait. And then sometimes because the deadline was there, and he would, only a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, he went out to find authorities. In India there are very learned persons in Sanskrit, and he knew most of them, and he would have faith in just a few of them, and he would go out, and guess what? That person had the same problem with the same paragraph every time. And so he just went back, and he just waited, and he tried to understand, and he waited until he understood it, and then he translated it. And once, in the whole Bhagavatamrita, because I was there, and I was the reader, and I read the whole thing, and we all put our intelligence in trying to make sure that it was correct, and I was more or less watching Jayadvaita Maharaj and Gopi Pranadana Prabhu do this exercise of proofreading, proof hearing the thing. And we came to this one section where there was 3 or 4 really complex, purports, one after another. And I was reading, and then after it was one thought, but it was connected with 3 purports. And then all of a sudden, Jayadvaita said, wait a second. And then he said, go back to the purport before. I think it was a 4. He said 1 or 2 before. Connect that with this. And sure enough, there was something that wasn't quite right. And then Gopi, he had Gopi go to the Sanskrit. Sure enough, adjusted, and then it flowed. And we looked at each other, and there were tears in all of our eyes. And when I experienced that, what I thought was, this is how the descending potency comes into a devotional effort. Not necessarily through the heart of one person, unless you're on the level of Srila Prabhupada. You could write these purports but when a group of sincere devotees get together to do something that a liberated soul wanted done, and if that's done properly, then the descendant potency comes into that. And that's what we're hearing in these purports by my godbrothers. My conclusion that I saw. So you have to get the clear understanding, and to do that you have to inquire, and to do that you have to learn how to inquire, and to learn that you have to inquire how to inquire. You cannot blindly go there just by sitting in the same, with the vibration going. There's some benefit you get just by being in the room when the sound is being. But you must use your spiritual intelligence and the capacities we do have. Therefore, manusyanam sahasreshu kaschit yadidi siddhaye yatitamapi siddhanam kaschin mam vedi tadpadaha. There may be, out of many millions of people, there may be one who's trying to improve oneself spiritually. And of those who have actually come to the perfectional stage, in this case, Prabhupada defines the perfectional stage as having realized he's not the body, perceiving directly he's not the body. Out of millions of those, one understands Krishna in truth. So if you think you know something, you're going in the wrong direction, because the closer you get to that perfection, the more you think you don't know anything. Because real humility comes into the heart. The closer you come to Krishna and see the difference between you and Krishna, then real humility comes into the heart. And then Krishna will give you the knowledge, all the knowledge. At -1 minute.
Well, Buddha's questions were making
This is Matthew.
The Sri Upanishads mantra 11 that says only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. I'm wondering, how do we do that process?
We were just discussing it.
Yeah.
Were you listening?
Yeah. I want to make sure that that's the same thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. That was fantastic. You only took you could have gone back another, but we can't. Time doesn't work like that. We can't go back and do it again. Okay. Hare Krishna, thank you so much. Thank you for all the reflections, nice reflections and questions and.
Carlos asked one.
What?
Carlos asked another question. On here.
Go ahead.
Carlos says, I have had dreams of someone I know dying before his death. Can Maya cause a type of distraction from my mind, eye, truth?
It's possible. It's possible. Because time is a continuum. And Krishna knows everything, past, present, and future. So it's possible to tie into that and get some premonition of something that's going to happen in the future. It's possible. But it's not always like that. We don't take dreams, generally, we don't take dreams seriously. But it's possible to have a dream that's real. But in general, we don't take them seriously because usually it's not. So don't kind of like rely on dreams and live in a dreamland. Prabhupada said, get yourself together in this plane before you think you're together in the dream plane. Okay, that's all I got to do tonight. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta-vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. See you tomorrow night, same time, same station, right here in the live studios at Radha Lane. Hari Bol, see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.